Then you had, of course, that admission later on after the election of the big cabal that worked together to make it all happen the way that it happened. Of leaders of industry working with trade unions and the far left to make sure they got the vote that they wanted. At the polls, anyway. And that was in Time, Time magazine. You can't make this stuff up. But you're living through amazing times, aren't you, where law is selectively applied. It depends who you are as to what kind of law they're going to apply to you. So again, it's not really straightforward logic. It must always be the same. It's like medicine itself. They've even thrown out the clinical diagnosis of illnesses now. They just don't bother doing it. It's all done with swab tests and blood tests and computer analysis. But forget the clinical observations or the patient's own experience of signs and symptoms and your clinical observations of signs and symptoms, which is supposed to lead to diagnosis, you see. Who needs that anymore, eh? When you've got big agenda, who needs clinical observations for that when you've got these agendas and quotas to meet and so on, for goodness sakes? You want to be logical here. You're living through incredible times where all power is so corrupt that it could never even find the honesty to admit it to you. All working on a huge agenda to bring in a complete planet-wide ownership to the same cabal, to bring it all under the same cabal's ownership. Everything. Land, farming, you, families, societies, all under their command. Under the guise of emergency powers. Whoa, eh? And the same cabals were taking over the world's resources for years and years and years. Now look at the big clubs at the top, big clubs, financial clubs and so on. They might seem that there to be thousands of corporations involved, but really there's not. You'd be surprised how few people own thousands and thousands of corporations, big international corporations. Some individuals, if you look into their front companies and all their sub-companies, you don't realize that they own thousands of companies beneath them. They're so almost hidden, but you can actually dig some of them up. And it's astonishing again, but once again, why are we so astonished? How did we perceive the world to be? How is it we're so ignorant and naive about the real world? Even when you're living through it and you get example after example of cabals and takeovers and amalgamations their entire life long. They used to have these articles, even in the 1970s, in the newspapers in Britain, and they'd be followed by cartoons in the newspapers. Then the common theme was, so we're one big giant world corporation. That would be then the kind of the cartoon. That was as a big whale swallowed all the other little whales and so on. And that was a kind of common joke at the time. That's how it would end. But it wasn't really a joke. It was a truism that you'd end up that way anyway, the way it was going. Well, guess what? That was a long time ago. And then you have to always say, well, if that's the nature of corporations. I remember reading about international corporations, different countries, and they used to have advisory books or booklets for nations, for actual nations they had to deal with them in diplomacy, for business. And they said one of the worst countries to deal with is the US. Because they actually had cultural tips on the US. It was very different from Britain, because Britain was so formal when it came to to just work and so on, and people you knew would be Mr. or Mrs. so-and-so. That, yeah, I actually had Mrs. at that time too. And they'd be formal, you see. You wouldn't go and say, how you doing, Harry, you know? It didn't so happen so much. So they told you that the Americans will be very, very pleasant to your face, the business guys, you know. And they'll call you by your first name right off the bat to put you at ease and so on. But that was their way of disarming you. And if you did anything kind of just on kind of friendly terms with these big CEOs, corporate CEOs, American, if you didn't get it all in writing and really through layers of lawyers, you'd end up losing your shirt, because their whole modus operandi was to disarm you and take you over so smoothly, again, as painless as to getting euthanized, that you'd lost everything before you realized it, or you're working for them, you see. And the US was really voracious and a tremendous appetite for that across the world, just gobbling up businesses and nations and taking over countries, literally, you know. If you take over the basic infrastructure necessities in agriculture, you can run them rather quickly. And then, of course, in other countries, of course, Africa, as an example, Africa was so corrupt by its tribal leadership, and the people, you just bribed a few people off, and you could run whole nations quite easily and cheaply. That's what they did, the big corporations, of course. And anyone who stood up against the corporation was disposed of. The US would have teams go in and they'd put them down, and they get the people to pay the people. They could create an internal army. You know, these people are fed up with this leader who's so corrupt and terrible that the Freedom Party wants to get rid of him, and that's how it'd be presented on the news. But it's really the US behind it, and the CIA, you know, and they'd overthrow them, and the rest of the world would say that's probably a good thing, because apparently the guy was a real nasty dictator anyway. And no, he just wasn't playing ball, you see. That's how it's really done. You know? That's very similar to what you saw in, if you read that book, it was Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I think he did videos on it too. And he was sent out by the US and big corporations and of course, the way he says that too, you know he's talking about the big banks and maybe even the World Bank. They'll lend to these countries to take them over. Then they get land for debt swaps. Lots of articles on that. And the UN's part of that too. They take over as biosphere. We'll be protectorates of the land that we take over, that were yours, you know. But first you've got to get the World Bank involved to get you into debt. Then the IMF comes in and makes the deal. Well, we'll just take the land instead. And the UN ends up with the biosphere. You know. It's just corrupt takeovers, folks. Well, I thought the UN was a good organization. Good for you. Just continue to sleep away there. There's hardly anything that you can look at that's not corrupt. And it's always been that way. Old man Rockefeller did say this, and David Rockefeller said the same thing, you know, the son. He said, competition is a sin. And he wasn't making a joke about it. You understand who these folk are. And they believe they have the right to take over nations and resources. They really believe that. That's part of the reason that Rockefeller started the monopolies up. Rockefeller wasn't just on his own there doing his own thing. Don't fall for that nonsense. He was already part of a world empire system. The same system that had sent Lord Earl Grey over to the US as a go-between between the Milner Group that ran the British Empire and Mandel House. The guy who says in his own writings that he was really responsible for getting Wilson to agree upon a Federal Reserve System. And they all said that, even the British Empire, we're the protectorates of the land. We're the protectorates of the resources, as though, yeah, you just don't know how to handle them, but we do. You understand? We're used to handling incredible amounts of money and things. There's nothing worse than having a cabal that pretends to itself and can convince itself that they're the guardians, and they actually call themselves that too, the guardians. Prince Charles, when he was carried away one day with his own pomposity and ignorance, he says, I am a member of the Olympians, he says. Well, there you go. He wasn't talking about running races. Not with his knock knees. But there you go. I mean, this is what you're living in, and you never knew it, did you? You thought that these companies were all independent companies doing takeovers and Bill Gates is pushing for depopulation, and they're working for taking down all the small farms across the planet. You know, they're wasteful. You know, and cutting down forest mythologies and stuff. You know, that was over long ago. The forester. Cutting them down. And he's taking more and more land over all the time. The biggest landowner now, in the States. Oh, wow. And the Bush family were doing it too, as they were taking all the rights and freedoms from the American citizens and the world. No privacy and all that, remember that? Tighten your belts, it could be in for the long haul. And they invested stacks of their own personal fortunes in Latin America. Some of the biggest farming areas, Was it Uruguay and Paraguay and so on? But that's just coincidence. You know that, don't you? Because the world's run by coincidence theories. Everything's just coincidental. It's coincidental that Rockefeller's talked about competition being a sin as he grabbed and monopolized all energy for America. That was just a coincidence. He did the two things at the same time, said that and did it. And then when they went and supposedly deregulated it all and took the power away from monopolies and they did fragment and sell off his... No, they find out they still existed with front people running them. That came out years later. The folk thought they were different independent... No, they were still under secret agreements, all run by the Rockefellers, still owned by them. That's how the world's run. And that's what they did too with the Milner Group when they went into Africa and different places and to take the gold and the diamonds away from the peasants, you know, the Boer people, these Dutch farmers, that were sitting on lots of that. The Milner Group, being aristocrats and so on. Working for the crown too, you know, crown authority. And having private organizations because they were a private group that ran the British Empire. Private group. They also ran the newspapers, all of them, across the empire. They owned them all. They must always standardize opinions, you know. If folk have independent media, they might start getting their own ideas. Heaven forbid, Where would that lead to eventually? This is not conspiracy stuff. The Rockefellers boasted years later about how they took over the media in the States, how they created it and took over all the rest. To formulate public opinion. And then you have total spectrum dominance now by using the military capability. Who do you think owns the military? There's hardly a general you'll find that's retired or semi-retired who's not in the payroll of big tech and the big corporations with big incomes. There's really very little hidden today, really, you know. Remember, folks, too, cutting through thematrix.com. Send a few bucks my way, PayPal. Personal check is fine. Some folks can send cash. And checks, as I say, personal checks are okay. Some countries still have international postal money orders and they're going to be called international postal money orders. They can still be cashed here, but the US doesn't use them to Canada anymore. Or accept them outside the US and Canada. You can still send them to Canada. So, and MoneyGram, I think, still works as well. even though we're under lockdown, and I've got to make the big trip shortly into town. But yeah, send a few bucks, keep me going. And again, I always stress it, even if you hear me on other outlets, because other folks post my material, remember to go into my own site, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and list all my official sites on that site. It's all listed there. In case one of them goes down, hopefully you can always tune in. And the talk's always out on Sunday night, by Sunday night, before midnight. From my sites, it might not be the next day or sometimes 2 days afterwards. It's up on alternate sites outside, but my own sites are all up by Sunday night. So remember, look in there. That's a fast way to get them. And it's a good idea too to just right-click and download them and play them at your leisure. Or put them on your MP3 player, wherever else you use. Because you don't have to sit, you see. If you realize you're getting trained to sit and watch things you don't need to watch anymore. Remember, technology is to change you. That's one of the main purposes of it. Again, you even ask sociologists and psychologists that any invention put within the home, your own environment, will alter the environment and by altering you and your behavior to it. But it's just incredible how many people, again, not who are in touch with me, will send me good links to things, but they must spend their days, some of them, just watching video after video, documentaries after documentaries, just sitting to watch it. That's a good part of your life gone, which is altering your behavior. So at least my talks at the moment are mainly up on audio, and you can download the audio from my site, and that way you don't have to sit and stare, at the little pictures that move all the time. You don't need that. And then you can listen to an hour at a time that way as well. So getting back to the power brokers, the people, it's about real power, And people have no idea that these characters set out a long time ago, even in the 1700s. You can actually trace it before that, but you can trace it from the British East India Company. I gave these talks in the beginning, years ago, about how that was one of the first international trading companies that they set up, a monopoly trade system too, that helped to expand the British Empire. Big part of it, actually. And people forget it was mainly private armies. These corporations had their own armies that were interchangeable with the regular armies, you see. Some of the officers could go back and forth quite easily. And they were put across the whole world, working on behalf of the corporations that were part of the British Empire. Many of the banks, the rulers, when they brought in the central banking system, put their own relatives over as the overseers of countries for the British Empire. The empire was just a business. It's a corporate. It's registered as a corporation, understand, as your countries are. And they had their private armies would go in with the ships. And I mentioned before, the US did exactly the same thing. After American War for Independence, they sent navies into other countries. They would literally blockade them, their ports, unless they allowed them to trade. They wanted to get resources cheap, using gunboat diplomacy. It was called gunboat diplomacy, and they would often shell countries from the sea until they'd shell the ports until the countries succumbed. That's business. That's your respectable businessman's way, you see, of the past. Today it's a bit more camouflaged, but they still use hard power again, your nation's military for their... And the military are given simplistic stories as to why they're going to invade nation. Like your country really cares about how some dictator is treating his own people. Do you really believe that? Do you believe that? Huh? I hope you don't anymore. I really hope you don't. The excuses you're given are nonsense. Utter rubbish. when you read the history books of cultures from the present all the way back to, I'm talking about dominant cultures, empires, all the way back to ancient times, the modern ones always refer to the ancient times. Knowledge is never forgotten, remember. In part, the reason that knowledge of Greek history and philosophies and so on was taught, that blending into a Roman Empire, then eventually down through time into what became the British Empire, what it was taught to the people who helped rule the British Empire, because the history was there of managing peoples, including how to sometimes turn troops on your own peoples and decimate them if they wouldn't go along with certain plans. I mean, it's the fairy tale version, again, is for junior school and even for high school and university. There's higher archives of these kind of histories kept for those who are put into powerful positions, or positions of higher power, put it that way. And some professors, like Quigley, talked about them, these particular archives, that a few, not a lot of professors, but some are allowed into, because they'll end up working for the system, the present governing system. The real, you might call it deep state, it's got all kinds of names, of course, but it's all part of the same thing. But what got me was going through the British system, because like all powers and powerful systems, they always dress up their power over other nations as being beneficial to the nations, as though they were doing some kind of moral crusade or something. And I guess that's the way that all conquering tyrannies must dress themselves up as. Otherwise, they might find it even hard to live with themselves. They've got to start believing in the myth that they're really there to help people. But it isn't until you get into the real archives that they go on about the need to take resources from the countries, and that's the main cause of wars, and taking countries. They don't go in there because the people in some sects in India were burning their wives, when the husband died in a funeral pyre. That's not why they started to rule India, you see, any more than they invaded Iraq because Saddam was a bad man to his own people. You must always demonize an enemy very simplistically. You don't want to go into any depth, because if you go into depth, then people can pick holes in an elaborate excuse, you see. Keep it simple, as I say. But if you go into ancient Greece, Greece was notorious for expanding an empire. Again, it was a commonwealth of nations eventually, with a commonwealth banking system and a moneyed system of taxation for all the member states and islands that belong to it, to keep a massive army on the go. And of course, the centralized power always wants more and more and more, until it's exhausting the other contributors to the actual central power core of it all, that squander it and live the good life at the expense of everybody else. Rome went the same way, of course, as empires all tend to do, until Rome depended on its conquest of other nations to even feed themselves, to bring in the grain and harvesting and all the rest of it, of grain for survival's sake, basic survival, never mind all the other luxuries they brought in too. They're all resources of that day, that time. But what you find, and Darwin knew this too, because again, the knowledge is never lost amongst those particular classes that rule. The way that Darwin puts it about evolution, we talked about a superior nation when they go in and overtake an inferior, a less developed society. He's talking about eugenics and development and so on. He said once they've conquered another people, often the conquered will turn in on themselves. That they'll end up going to whatever drugs are handy, alcohol or whatever other kinds of drugs are there. The men, generally, mainly the men too, will turn in on themselves, because the reason for being is often eliminated. Their culture is being destroyed, you see. And it's really important, this part, because again, we're so well studied, more so than any insect even, so that we can be ruled by those who understand the techniques. And it might help you too understand them, because that's why we have batteries. I call them batteries, regiments of psychologists all working globally together to manage our minds and to create terrors, wars of terror on the public, so you'll comply along a predetermined path that definitely has been mandated at countless meetings in the past to happen, and to come into and to bring a new system into force. So they know darn well that they've already had a war upon societies, the ones involved, the first world countries, for a long, long time. Complete war. There really was as those countries were calling up their young men to go off and get slaughtered and to slaughter other nations in World War I and II, the same power brokers that ran an empire and talked about uniting a whole planet by using wars into the same world empire, and had even hand it over to another nation like the US when the time came. And even talked about eventually handing it over to China. And when they talked about that at the world meeting, it was in the 1930s. This is not conspiracy stuff. I got their books here that they published for their members at the time. And then you realize you're living through a system. So yeah, as the Second World War especially was on the go, they were drumming up the whole idea of continuing a war on all their own cultures. They had already dreamed up how to create a new culture for Japan and Germany while World War II was on the go. And they worked out their big planning committees, and again, the behaviorists of today and so on, all working on it. But they also thought, to bring a world empire in, they'd have to have a war on their own societies, so that average people would just give up their rights and freedoms and the idea of having sovereignty and a sovereign nation to protect them, because you really eliminate borders down the road and create mass migrations and so on. All planned during the war, by the way. Yeah? As they were still telling people to join up and go off and get slaughtered to protect their rights and freedoms. So you understand, we truly are treated as children. A reality is a reality invented by advanced minds, believe you me, but really designed for children, to keep you as children. It's just astonishing to me, it really is. And here's the thing too, you can say such things so tritely, so easily, but the impact, it doesn't hit the people because it's so ominously horrible what's been planned in the past and what you've lived through and not even known it. That most folk couldn't handle it even if they understood it now, because they'd go into shock, wouldn't you? Of course, they blame it on COVID if you did, but this is the world you're living in. You're given fairy stories for reality. But they decided to create a whole new world society after World War II, and they'd have to destroy the cultures within that the people believed in, not the upper class, but the people themselves. And so there's a war upon the people, including a war upon the males. Now here's tying in with Darwin again. As they already knew what happened in other countries, like even going into and destroying, say, the Native Americans, which were misnamed as Indians, but the natives, and how eventually, as their tribes being destroyed, their cultures being, and it doesn't matter what you think of them, with their cultures and their warlike bands and clans and so on, and tribes. Doesn't matter what you're taught to think about that. Because that's the very excuse that they'll use after they conquer, the dominions conquer nations. It's, well, we brought peace and civilization. Well, wait a minute here. Then you're judging about their way of life regardless. And yes, it turned out some of these tribes were incredibly cruel to each other, incredibly cruel, with old ongoing wars that were going on for centuries on and off. Absolutely. But you can't use their culture and their way of life as an excuse to invade them and take everything away from them. That's what we did again in Iraq, isn't it? A predetermined war, pre-planned, regardless of Saddam Hussein even being. If somebody else had done the same thing. Nothing to do with 9/11 attacks, by the way. He was just part of the list, that the PNAC group had come out with in the 1990s of nations to be taken out and destroyed for other reasons which they don't want to even admit to yet. If it's kind of dangerous even to mention it at times. But from ancient Greece to Rome, all the way up to the British Empire and the American Empire, it's always the same thing. You must always tell your troops you're going off to... That's what they said when they went into Iraq, right? Operation Iraqi Freedom, what they called it. What piffle was that? Piffle. And here is the natives of that country looking at these American troops. The American troops were cursing and swearing at them, saying, "We're bringing you democracy, you stupid so-and-sos," And here's the natives here looking at them in bewilderment because they didn't want your idea. They knew that you didn't have democracy, Mr. G.I. Joe. But you certainly have been brainwashed, spouting off democracy to a people who had their own system. Whether you like it or not, it's their system. It's not a matter of, you don't invade countries because you don't like certain things, you see. Because then, what are you going to do when some tyrant wants to invade you because he doesn't like certain things either? No. But that's what the nations do. They always say, we're there to liberate people and to bring them freedom and democracy or whatever the term is at the time. The Romans didn't have democracy, but they had a system, I guess early democracy, in that a wealthy elite ran the Senate, you see. The US was kind of modelled upon that, but so was Britain to an extent too. They eventually give a House of Commons for the people of Britain, commoners, right? So, but even though the people who run it and who really run the House of Commons have never been commoners, they get a few commoner front people, that's it. But the real ones behind the scenes are actually up there with the House of Lords, naturally. And the House of Lords is a form of Senate, you see. In the old days, if you're meritorious to the nation, you were given a kind of meritorious order, and you're put into the Senate. You're a statesman. That was the idea, but Britain lost that very quickly, even when it started. I don't think it really existed as such for most people, because as soon as the Bank of England was created, and for the reason that government could then borrow money and put the nation down to pay it off, and people, the loans, and they would use the money for expanding their empire. You see, that's when they went off to create the British Empire. Now they had that on the books. Same as the US. Once they got the Federal Reserve in place, they were off to World War I, just the nick of time, Just coincidence, of course. And when you understand how it really, really works, then you get very quickly, you develop a different insight into what the forces behind empires, and the real reasons behind it too. And forget all your histories, you're given these pompous paintings of characters that were part of your history and your empire and all that nonsense, These same people in Britain, for instance, with their tights on, wearing their silk stockings and all that, would never let a peasant near them, ever, in their entire lifetime. But they've taught the peasants to look up to them. Well, this is a good statesman who spoke for us, or who's kidding who, And of course, those who serve, the higher servants of the system are well rewarded for it, to get more than anybody else down below them. And so therefore they're very loyal to the system, even though they can have their own private jokes about the reality of the system that's been beneficent to other peoples. I should say that history really was a horror story, a real history. I don't mean that folk lived in utter petrified horror all the time, but a lot of the time they did too in certain eras, because they really didn't have rights. And folk, it wasn't until really the late 1700s and through the 1800s and the 1900s did rights slowly develop for the general public. And they gave them all up very quickly, actually, with the world wars. That was part of the reason for World Wars II, 1 and 2. I mean, also, 2. But was to start training them to give up their rights and studied them as they did it under war scenarios, emergency powers, rationing, do what you're told, curfews, all these same things you've got now, under like using COVID as an excuse, and having people pull together as one and obeying the slogans, and we're all in it together, etc. Except when it comes to feeding time, you never get into the big lounges that Winston Churchill lay sat with all his cronies, and they had their steaks and everything else on the go back then, during the times of rationing. So coming to reality takes a bit of a shock, or you have to have the ability to absorb a bit of a shock, put it that way. If you really want reality, you can still live in the myth, And it doesn't mean that people that lived under these systems, I'm talking about the general population, were bad. No, they weren't generally. They're the same kind of people, who would just try and get along and survive as best they could under the different systems and times and places and so on. That's really how it is. But for them, it was often a horror show with starvation at times, and eventually getting drafted off to wars is another thing too. Wars that were, again, simplistic reasons for them. When, as I've said before, your governments literally were deciding how to take you down after the wars were finished. Just amazing, eh? Well, I got to destroy the family unit, for goodness sake. It's just too powerful. And when you have thousands of families with men and women as families, have so much in common with children and so on, or so much in common, then it's a formidable force that can band together quickly against government, you see. Because they all have the same kind of interest. They're married, man and woman, they have children, and they have then family needs, less taxes because we would raise children and all that kind of stuff, and education, yada, yada, yada. But it'll stand together quicker. Once you destroy all that, and you're left on your own, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, whatever you want to be called. And that's what H.G. Wells said after the League of Nations was created. This is event, it says now we're beginning to get to it. World government now. The end of the nation state. It's always been their goal, folks. Your nations that brought you the world wars also had as a goal to bring you a world governmental system. I've got all their books here from their world meetings, where it was discussed openly. And a lot of the newspapers published their articles at the time. World government was a necessity. And the nation states would have to give up their sovereignty for peace, you see. But yeah, they went to war on the families after World War II. High taxation. So again, look back, economic warfare, as Darwin talked about, too many ways to bring down population. You just increase the cost of living, and folk can't live, they can't have children, or more children die from malnourishment, and so on and so on. And that was common, by the way, right into the 1950s in Britain, for folk who don't know that. All through the 1800s, in the poorhouses, and how they knew the average life expectancy was about so many months for the different age groups and different genders. They'd all worked out on tables how long it'd take before they died. Almost scientifically to an extent, by the way. And they didn't create the poorhouses or any charities in the Victorian era to help the public. They actually built them. If you read the books from sociologists at the time and later, these were built, these even institutions, to house them as a deterrent from being poor and unemployed. And that's how they use it, as a threat. And they made sure that everybody knew how horrible it was inside, because you were worked literally to death there. Because you were scum and you were poor, and you ended up in the poorhouse. So the antidote was to not get work, whatever it paid. It doesn't matter if it's starvation wages. Better to starve slowly on a starvation wage and be working than unemployed. And they had meetings about this. And the language I'm using, the straightforward, was even more straightforward from the different tables that were put out there. of introducing and introducing the public to the horrible state of the affairs of the workhouses, the poorhouses. Just astonishing. And the elite class, see, they did class poverty as a mental illness. Yeah. Otherwise, you see, if you were not mentally ill, you wouldn't be in a lower class. In other words, even a lower IQ meant you were mentally ill. There wasn't a difference of IQ, as an example. And it wasn't a difference of being born into the right psychopathic families. No, they didn't mention that part of it, you see. They could be born in the right families. You had a start in life no matter what your IQ was, even if it was rather low, which a lot of it was, by the way. But there were psychopathic types, and that was a success factor. Now they had access to pulling the right ropes and strings, then you could survive as a good psychopath, regardless of what your intellect was. But if you were on the streets, you were looked down upon. They still use the techniques today, by the way, to make you look down upon the unemployed, in an age where unemployment is part of economics. Margaret Thatcher said we need a goodly amount of people to be unemployed to keep the wages down for those who are employed, you see. They could say, well, it's not paying much, are you? Well, if you don't want the job, there's plenty that will take it. You see, that's why you keep a big pool of the unemployed. What I'm talking about here is a harsh reality. Why dress it up, you see? And here's another thing too. They depend upon class systems to keep the system going. And those in the lower middle classes, you see, that might only be a few months away if they've ever lost their jobs from the streets themselves. Because you can go down very quickly in this day and age. But they'll look down too upon the homeless and so on. And maybe they are just and that's the impression, they're all mentally ill. No, they're not all mentally ill. But what you do have is part of this long war. This is a multifaceted, deliberate war with drugs everywhere. Look at the streets. I put up before the Oxiana movie, a documentary was done. I put the one up before, another one up is Diane Sawyer, I think it was, where she goes into her old family haunts at one time, and the drug problems there and unemployment, deliberately kept that way, by the way. And then you saw Seattle. That document, Seattle's dying, that was before COVID came along. And the drug problems is astronomical. The tent cities and the trailer and cars that flooded into the warmer climates because they're living in their cars, lots of people now. But again, the ones who can still scrape by are looked down on them. They don't realize you're not far from that yourselves. But they count upon your attitude to condemn people. They end up like that. This is a deliberate war, folks. Deliberate. And whereas the old system, I gave the talks before all that happened, about what was going to happen, because I've read all their books. And they love to publish their books and tell you where it's all going to go. A service economy always brings you to the stage like a dog paddling in a swimming pool, falls into the pool, it paddles, and a service economy, what it does, it gives all your manufacturing to another nation. We did all that. We paid for all to move to China through your lovely politicians signing all the documentations and so on. And then you import all the stuff that's cheap, and you have all these middlemen, and that's where the money comes from, to the middlemen, and then to the stores or outlets, and then to the customers, you see. And that's a completely service economy. You're serviced in many ways in one. I often like to think of the farmer's term for it. And you don't realize you've given away your ability to even be self-sufficient. And most folk who profit off as a middleman for a while think, oh, this is pretty good. I can get all this cheap stuff in at low cost and sell it at a high cost. until eventually there's a glut in the market, or they've now decided it's the end of the service economy. Because, you see, they want to bring down consumerism, post-consumerist society. So what's left then? Well, there's nothing left. You can't even make the basic things that you need to survive, like knives and forks for your cutlery, for your table. It's all done abroad. But the basic stuff you need is all made outside, pretty almost all actually imported. So like the dog in the swimming pool, you have a great old time while the dog's healthy and it's feeling it's having, and it hasn't realised its peril yet. And it hasn't been round the whole edges of the pool to realise there's no steps to get out of here. And eventually you tire and you drown. You just drown. That's what the puppy does, the dog does. And what I'm talking about here was discussed fully in the British papers in the 1970s, when they discussed this trading agreement with Europe. That's what they called it, trading agreements at the time, you know, as they lied to the public. It was always designed to be an integration of nation states into a super parliamentary system. I've got the books from the 30s from the organizations that worked on it back then, in the 1930s. And they lied to their publics for years and years. They had them through another world war. Then they lied again and kept lying as they brought them into a parliamentary system that was to be non-democratic. And all the top corporate leaders of the world that owns everything were involved in setting it up. And they put in the front people called the commissioners at the top there, who are unelected and secretive, by the way. You don't know who a lot of them are. And these CEOs, these top owners, I should say, of corporations, place them there. That's how it's run. You know? And in the books in the 1930s, as I say, they talked about what happens to American Indians and other cultures that were decimated and taken over by superior cultures, as they call them, superior cultures, you see. And how, as I say, they self-destruct. And when you read about the plans for before World War II started, by the dominant groups that run the world and run the British Empire, at their world meetings in the 1930s, they talked about this. They said, you know, we'll have to bring a different system in because they don't want opposition at home to bring in a world governmental system and the end of the sovereign state, the national state. Well, that's when they talked about the need to basically destroy the family unit. So most of the war would be initially on the males, you see, who would end up like the Darwinian stage of just like you when you conquer a nation, and suddenly the males have lost their reason for being, and they eventually lose all respect from others. That's intentional, you see, under that kind of war. And Britain used that again, that type of system, against other nations that it conquered deliberately. And in fact, we've used it across the Middle East under the different countries, the Islamic countries, until the men start to self-destruct. They lose their ability, their belief in their culture, which often has a religion, a deity. They lose their belief in that deity who would let this happen to them, sort of thing. Then they start to turn on themselves. And again, the Native Americans did the same thing. No matter what you think of their system, or you'll call it all kinds of nasty things like primitive, what's superior about yours? But every male would have his connection to his deity. You see, that was important in tribal cultures. And once that's destroyed, there's nothing. You've lost your purpose. You can't even think yourself as a real man anymore, because even the women will be looking for the conquerors to wed. You see, who have confidence and money and they swagger around. Whereas your own guys are dejected and turning towards themselves, self-destructing. Because there's one thing, purpose has been destroyed. That's how you just really destroy nations. Now the elite talked about this in the 1930s. in their empire meetings. And he said, oh, yes, it's such a terrible thing when conquered peoples are destroyed like that, you know. And we hope to not make it as bad when we bring in this world governmental system. But they knew they were going to destroy. Don't forget, for their own families, to keep them going, the wild men, as Darwin called them, Charles Gordon Darwin, who were steering the ship, doing the planning and all that, uninhibited by moral convictions and loyalties to nations. They were completely uninhibited, you see, to do what they had to do. But the rest of the public, the war was on them. Because they see themselves, like Bertrand Russell said, like a different species. That's the truth of the world. That is the truth. And the class system is just, to me, is extraordinary in all nations. Well, extraordinarily the same in all nations. It's rather self-evident. And even in the US, where they try to disguise a little bit with, there's not such an obvious difference in accent, even though there's still a university accent. Lots of them will copy this almost a higher nasal pitch to it or something, to be different, you see. But there's definitely a class system. Of course there is. George Bush Jr. was more honest. He wasn't the brightest either, but he was honest. And sometimes when he said that, and his aides mentioned this in their books afterwards, he said that he sat amongst them and he says, does anybody know any poor people? He says, I've never met any poor people. And he literally said that. I've never met any poor people. See, they don't meet you. He says, does anybody, can you find me what they're thinking about the system in America? But at least he was honest. Most of them would never have mentioned that, you see. All their speeches to the poor people are written by very wealthy professional writers, script writers. They feel your pain, you know. But that's the reality of the world. The classes are something else, and that's what the elite depend upon, that each class will persecute the bunch beneath them. They really count on that when times get tough. Quite something. So self-destruction, once cultural domination by another group has been put upon them, always happens. Mainly towards the men, and it's encouraged, and it's nowhere more is evident as in the American education system today, where literally they teach you not just about what ethnic group is responsible to be hated about everything, but also what gender mainly, you know? And that's taught by taxpayers' money. So they get churned out hating the males. Quite something, isn't it? And you think somehow that's all quite normal. This is warfare. This is literal warfare upon you. And that's also what's taught in preparation for genocides in the past and maybe the future. You always name your enemy, blame them for all the world's problems and all your problems, demonize them, put them into third-rate status in a nation or you know, even in an empire. Third-rate status, you see, till they're nobodies. Ridicule them, lambast them, teach the public to hate them. All in preparation for what? Generally, their annihilation, folks. And I don't wish for things. There's no point in wishing for things. But it would be nice if folks started to realize what's going on. It would be nice, wouldn't it? But I don't put up much hope for that, because the massive psychological indoctrination system is pretty well perfected. It was perfected when Bertrand Russell wrote his books in the 1940s and 50s and onwards. He said that, you know. When if they can get the children young enough, he said it doesn't matter. And he believed, like the World Revolutionary Group that he also belonged to, which also included lots of aristocracy, big chunks of it actually. He really believed initially they'd have to remove, and he said that, but we used to think we'd have to remove the children from their parents at birth and raise the children communally so they wouldn't be contaminated with the parents' ideas. He says, but now, with scientific methods which have been proven in schools, in Britain he's talking about, he says we can indoctrinate the children, and the parents can still be responsible for raising the children financially. That'll be their job, is to financially support the children, feed them, clothe them, and put them through school. And he said because with scientific indoctrination at school, the children won't be able to be contaminated by they'll ignore their parents. Well, look how successful that's been, eh? And folks still think, they've got rights and freedoms and that their voice counts, when your own governments for years and years have taken your tax money to brainwash the generations of children not to listen to their parents. And that's what Russell said. He says the state will then be responsible for the indoctrination of the children and what they'll think and believe, not the parents. All you are is to support them financially. That's your job. But that was always part of the reason people had children, was to then pass on your values to the children. That was taken away from you. Most folk don't even realize it. And even their comedies, they were also part of the indoctrination process, was mainly through comedies and so on, the family, or they show you dysfunctional families and drama, TV stories, but comedies is a good way of doing it. And the dads are relevant pretty well, always a comic figure in these dramas, these comedy dramas. The mum makes all decisions, she's a bright one. And the children even laugh and put down the dad as an idiot. The guy who's financially supporting them. And you're taught to even laugh at them. This is how it's done, eh? I've always said, you see, your entertainment is completely weaponized, and it has been weaponized since, for the real psychological purposes that's been weaponized for today, has been at least since before World War II, and stepping up big time after it. And the sad thing is, too, that just as slickly as, say, Scotland as an example, other countries too under the British Empire, but Scotland, India as well, eventually started churning out young guys for the military, again, giving them a bit of pride, self-confidence, and pride they'd never had anywhere else in society, putting a uniform on, going and kill people. And that became the normal when you're taken over like that. Very slickly, it's done very slickly, isn't it? Until after one generation, folk think it's all quite natural, to fight for a nation or a system or an empire that conquered you and maybe even decimated your forefathers, who fought against them. Very slick. And it's interesting to watch the same thing that's happened in the US. Exactly the same thing. A lot of the same stock actually was soaked up by America. They came from Britain, from England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. And you can see it too, for the ones that Hollywood hates through their movies all the time in the South, Were the same stock that eventually were deported from Scotland and places like that. And they became, again, they did fill the uniforms up, they'd supply the bodies to fill the uniforms. And as I've mentioned it so many times, they've been used and used and used over and over and over. And now you see, they're openly from the governmental talking heads. Now their job's almost done, you see. They're bringing in this world empire to this be taken over by another nation. And they'll police the world, so to speak, eh? I said they'd have to destroy you. Well, you're hearing it from the mouths of those in Congress now, eh? As a target, they're quite open at who they're targeting. The same folks are getting ready to get sent off for the last few wars to fight. Because they'll definitely turn on you big time once it's over and done. I'm telling you the truth, folks. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying and you realize it. Because it's the one group that the globalists hate and fear the most. as the ones they've been using to conquer the world. And now they're planning to take it down as soon as they've finished off the last few countries on their list, that I've mentioned before. Nothing's really hidden, anymore, if you've got eyes to see. And that's what empires do. And that's why the tricks of empires are being used too, because they understand how to play it, how to play that game, you see. And it's a pity that nations allow themselves to be used like that. But again, I don't blame them, because your indoctrination is so incredibly effective all the time. For year by year, as folk are born, their indoctrination starts as soon as they start to understand anything at all, even in children's stories. And the stuff's embedded in the stories. It's embedded in cartoons. It's embedded through the schooling completely. You must use and abuse over and over again for the same dominant minority that never get their hands dirty. And who do soak up the profits from all the conquests as they tell the rest of the public that we're bringing civilization, and let's talk about the good things we've done for these nations. Well, wait a minute here. Who's judging your right to go into any nation for any reason? If they're not invading you, why are you doing it? Well, it's obviously for the resources. I remember putting up that documentary years ago, a few years back anyway. It's an old one on diamonds. And this is it's interesting to see the families that took over the diamond and gold mines of South Africa, under the guise again of expanding the British Empire using the Milner Group and Curtis and these characters, and the compacts with De Beers, diamonds and gold and all that. But in the documentary, you see them, literally, the guy on the surface of some of these places, going along their hands and their belly, crawling, feeling for the diamonds in the dirt. No kidding you. There's nothing uplifting about diamonds, folks. Either getting them or digging them or finding them on the surface. There's nothing. It's all humiliating as far as I can see, The greed for certain things. And this is what they call wealth and power, which is wealth is power over others, you see. Isn't that rather sad? Same with gold and so on. And silver and all the other stuff that says value. And always those with the cash become aware, once they elevate up into the higher clubs, that, they're now powerful people. Not just rich, but powerful. They can change societies by ordering it to get changed. And lesser minions rush in to do it all for them. The expert class. And yet, even as your countries are going down and the war's been declared upon you, there's still people in the lower, say, middle classes and in the upper working classes who really believe that the enemies that they're fighting, or at least are trying to fight to keep their system that they're living in, which has some good points left, maybe, as long as you have opponents, you see. And so they really were dedicated to fight against, say, communism. They really believed in it. Who wanted that, you see? And as soon as the communism is gone, then your own countries drop the can on you because they don't need you anymore either. And they don't have to keep up the pretense of fighting the bad guys and giving you a few extras, not quite freebies, but extra cash in your pockets as long as you fought them. Once it's over, they plunder you as well. They don't need you. But there's a lot of folk dedicated to fighting communism who did believe in the old mythologies of their nations and the decency of the people. No doubt about that. There's decent people in all nations. But it's so sad that those who really rule you above you will sell you out so fast. And they did. They sold out people who'd fought against evil their entire lives. What they saw as evil, right? They completely sold them out. Really astonishing. Until Canada, as an example, too. Canada's awfully communistic, as you might notice. Where Trudeau even admits he loves China, and it's not encumbered with this idea of catering to people's rights and so on. You know? And once they admit that you're communist, you see, you don't really have individual rights. You're a cog in the wheel, for the greater good, etc. And a cog in the machine, as I say. Folk don't realize that under communism, you were all expendable because you truly were just independent parts that all fitted together as a big machine. For the machine, not for you see. And again, it was so intensely studied, communism, by the West, who set it up, as we all know. We funded it. Most of the revolutionaries were all trained inside America and were sent over there. Another story altogether, but it's a pity people just can't wake up and realize what they're living in. Even when you're benefiting for a little while from it, like a good paycheck, or you do join the military, it's a pity you don't see where it's supposed to go. And why are you going off with a paycheck to fight some other people in another country who've done you no harm? Well, your own country is falling apart behind you. By design. Who's using you? And if you accept the paycheck and you don't think about these things, then you have to accept that you're now a mercenary. That's what you are. Before, people had to go off to war, at least if they weren't mercenaries, with some kind of reason to justify their conscience and to bolster their conscience. You were doing it for what you thought a perceived good, whether it was fictitious or not, doesn't matter, The propaganda generally was pretty effective. But you'd have to have something to stand up for, and something to defend. If you don't have any of those qualities, then you truly are a mercenary. You don't care. You're doing it for a paycheck. And when you kill your own people under orders or kill other folk, that's all you're really doing. And if you accept that, then who will be sent to eventually eliminate you? Probably your own side again, when your purpose is over. And when you look at the state of the U.S., in the 10 years, at least I'll just take from the 10 years as an example, from Desert Storm to the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, to the present, you're talking about 30 years here, war. And all of the articles to do with altering the military by using them more for more and more missions and so on, more and more tours of duty, and to try and keep them in for years instead of retraining new groups all the time. Also have a hard core there, and then giving more credence to the establishment of special operations forces, small combat units sent across the world to do the dirty jobs and wet jobs and so on. But also for your basic army, just keep them drugged. There are lots of articles in science magazines and military magazines about the new soldier, the pharmaceutical soldier, the drugged soldier, leading to the super soldier idea, keeping you awake for days and days and days at a time by special, amphetamines as an example. And also the flatteners, as they call them, the emotional flattener drugs, which were all basically related to the diazepam family, and derivatives of that type of drug, which can be physically addictive to an extent. If you stop them dead after a while, you will have convulsions and tremors and panic attacks and so on, as your body starts to try to readjust and put its own endorphins in there instead. It takes a long time for that to happen. The body's awfully good at accepting drugs, synthetic types, that mimic natural chemicals in the body and hormones and so on. But the synthetic drugs, if they take over, your body will just shut off your own production. And there's a good balance. There's a good term, actually, a chemical balance, you see, because they're all interrelated, all the different chemicals. And when you take artificial ones, it's not the same. So it'll throw lots of things off within your system. Much like opium, certain minerals and vitamins will get leached out because of the drug. And so you become deficient in certain other things too, same as alcohol. With alcohol, you lose lots of vitamin B complex and 12 and so on, as it flushes out in the urine in larger quantities. And then many other things happen because of it too. It's a raw drug, I call it a raw drug, because it literally fries the nerves, literally, pretty well. And kills brain cells pretty quickly too. But it's raw and damaging. But the modern drugs that the military are on by prescription what an amazing cocktail. And they've always had articles breaking out in the military magazines about these cocktails that they're on now. Now they're keeping them in with tour after tour for years at a time sometimes. Some of these tours, they break them up, but they're in the military for years, you see. And even when they come back on leave, they're kept on this heavy drug state, and they're prescribed them like candy by the doctors, even on the bases. They've had articles recently again about that in the US and Canada and other countries. There's no questions asked about them. Keep them drugged, keep their emotional response flat. And that's what these drugs do to you. They flatten responses. It's like a great delayer, until they don't even bother you to an extent. That's the idea behind it, you see. Whatever you've done in action, and these wars are not pretty wars. Who's talking about the rules of war here? I noticed that they arrested some Australian special forces recently because they went on a killing spree. They were new to the game of being bloodied and all that, and they did what they always do, is to kill a few. But today, of course, everything's monitored in camera, and they talked about it, and they were just the peasants in the fields who went after, and sure, kill him too, and pop, and that's it. Because that's what they're trained to do. They don't train them to be social workers. And if they had done a lot of it, even within a week or two or a few weeks, they'd be put on the drugs to flatten their emotions, you see, so they don't think back on it. And once they come out of the military, they're kept on these drugs as much as possible. That's where they're wrecks. A lot of them end up on the streets, these guys, because little bits creep back into them. Then you try to say, well, who am I? What am I? Did I do that? Why did I do that? And then, of course, with the drug cocktail they're on, they lose their control at times, get a few drinks on them, and interaction in their liver with a battle between the different sugars and so on, and the alcohol, and with their liver and metabolism, and battling the drugs that they're on, they have total blackouts, complete blackouts, where they don't know what they're doing at times. And this is all authorized from the top, and has been for years and years. I can remember quite a few years back, there was ex-US servicemen that would call me, different ones. And one of them had got a job, and he'd been on all the drugs and so on too. And eventually he had his back broken and had cracked some vertebrae and so on. And he put in traction, and it kind of semi-healed to an extent, and then discharged. And then when he went to get compensation for it, what will happen when you're younger, your body can compensate to a great extent with the damage that's been inflicted, even from childhood, in fact. You won't really notice it till you maybe hit 30 or 35 or 40. And then the problems start to... Same with accidents or damage in the military. And so eventually he tried to get compensation. And they said, it probably wasn't due to what happened when you were in the military. Even though his back had been broken, he was in traction. And he ended up, this guy, on a minimal pittance, getting paid cash, a few bucks a week just for being a night watchman in an old ex-gold mine somewhere that they probably couldn't scrape much of a living out of, but he was putting... And he couldn't afford even the medication. He couldn't get the medication from the VA. And he had something similar you'd find with the reaction to some of these vaccinations, the thrombocytopenic purpura. Purpura is where you see little pinpricks of blood under the skin. It'll happen in your brain in different places, but he saw it under his skin because he lived on aspirin to try to kill the pains in his bones and joints that had been damaged, And that's how you're treated. You're used and you're spat out, you see. They don't like folk who complain, by the way, afterwards. They really don't like that. It's bad for recruitment. They're actually saying it's bad for recruitment. So they don't want them even putting uniforms on to go into different, like Remembrance Day memorials and things like that, or any of these things at all. It's bad for the outlook, the image. The image for military is young, healthy guys. You see, they don't want or old, healthy guys. They don't want folk who are got arms and legs missing and so on. It's bad for publicity. Even though their job is to go over to other nations and blow the legs and arms off other people and maybe get it done themselves. It's a bit kind of crazy, but there you go. That's how it is. But yeah, it's really sad to watch the lineup and them admitting where they get most of their traditional recruits from, the traditional families in the south of the States, and whom they despise. Hollywood despises them too. But boy, do they use them. And as they're using them, the last ones, for the last few wars, they're already training the public to hate them. Openly, from Congress. Ooh. Yeah, I tell you, it's a pity they would end. If a lot of them stopped going immediately, there'd be shock, absolute shock, with all the plans that have been set and laid out. But there you go. These are the fantasies you might have once in a while, and it's so true. Pretty well everything that happens has power within the people, but you never get the people to come together on any major thing, especially with the psychology and the war that's put upon them today to divide, conquer, divide, conquer, divide, conquer. You could bring the whole nation to a standstill very quickly on any topic at all. But it won't happen. With the guys who end up with the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, then the best thing they can do themselves is to get off all the psychoactive medications they're on, because they'll never be anywhere near normal, whatever normal is, until it's all out of their body. That can take years, actually, to get it out. I can remember many, many moons ago, the big war battles they had about Valium, you see, because Valium was it was handed out like literally like candies, maybe back in the 60s and 70s. I remember in Britain they had articles in the mainstream newspapers and magazines about the Valium group of drugs, diazepam type, and then nitrazepams for sleeping and other kinds and so on. And also had another category very similar of the Librium type drugs, where they said that I think it was something like 40 or 50% of British housewives were already on Librium. I mean, the doctors were all prescribing, because women would go to the doctors and have all these emotional problems at the time as they tried to balance families, because they still had families back then, and often work as well, And it's just too much. This whole superwoman idea was a Hollywood creation, not a reality, because you can't get run off your feet. You need time to relax, and you need time to have to yourself, and so on. And they came out with this myth that you could have it all. You could have it all, like Supermum. And it wasn't working, so they just handed these drugs like candy to them. And of course, the doctors are notorious for knowing very little, put it that way, about their own profession. Once they're qualified, it's money time, and status, because I like the status too. And in fact, the first thing you're taught really is how to make a patient be subservient to your views and opinions. So you're the person of authority, and so because you want them to do what we tell them to do. You see. So they actually have little courses on that, how to little acting things. We have to act with other doctors and pretend you're a patient and all that, to try and get them used to this. So you talk with authority, and because they don't want patients asking too many questions. They just want obedience. You see, obedience, and then they get what they want. Doctors get what they want. Total compliance. The patients, they used to call them in Britain the flying doctors, because if you went to see a doctor with the National Health Service and the different clinics that they set up throughout the country, often you wouldn't even get a seat. You just walk into the little cubicle, and they've got at the time 5 to 10 patients per sections of the area with cubicles. And you're just in there, and they come in with a notepad in their hand, a prescription pad, and you try it. Before you get it out your mouth what was wrong, they'd written a prescription, that was out. And of course, that's not how you practice medicine, of course, because you need time to find out what's really, really wrong before you dish out any pill. But this is what it turns out to be. Canada's the same, by the way. And at least Ontario is, and then the doctors are quite happy living with that, knowing they did a bad job of diagnosing and so on, and didn't do a proper job. But the money helps to compensate their conscience, and they can live with that, you see. But the system, as I say, of medicine is sorely lacking in real credibility when it comes down to what they're supposed to do and to what they actually really do. Where it's about vaccinating, and it's so true. The last few days that they're there, they might get 4 hours, maybe, in an afternoon. They admit that, of talking about vaccinations. Otherwise, they know nothing else. So they're dependent on the reps coming in around the surgeries from the drug companies to hand them out brochures and little bits of magazines and free pills, samples to try this and that and the other, you see. And they tend to believe what the pharmacologists tell them, the pharmaceutical industries tell them. Oh, this is perfectly safe. And so back in the 60s and 70s, these tranquilizers were the cure-alls for all your problems, you see. Because what they do is, again, delay the problem, If there's a problem in your mind and you've got problems with anxiety or in sleeplessness and all other things that go, well, these things aren't going to fix the way you fix the problem is to deal with the things that are causing the problem. It's always financial, or again, not enough time, or you're working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, whatever it happens to be. That's what you got to deal with. Taking pills, again, flattens your response until you won't care as much. But the problem's still going to be there. So, but regardless, that was the whole idea. Pharmacology was here to help you, you see. Not to fleece you, but to help you. And so they churned out these tranquilizers like you wouldn't believe it. At one of the movies they made, it was Walter Matthau, it was in a comedy. It's an airport scene where somebody faints at the airport, and this doctor examines the patient on the floor and says, "Does anybody here have any Valium?" And about 50 of them all pull out the pills from their pockets instantly, because that's how they're showing you. That's really how it really was back in those days. But lots of folk had terrible problems naturally with it, because it's far easier to take a pill and kind of dream through life, postponing all the problems which build up just like compound interest on bank accounts does, or loans does. And one day you're going to face it, and you keep putting them off and off and off. And I've known people who've done that, who took pills and put things off for ages, but then it comes crashing down. And their answer eventually is to overdose on the pills, inadvertently, generally, because even with all the pills, the problems become rather ominous and like mountains. And then you saw the same thing happening with the 2-page exposés or promotions, actually, of that wonder drug that came out in the 90s. Remember, every magazine, every newspaper was praising this stuff. And folk, again, don't say, wait a minute, these are paid, obviously. Why would they all be? Well, they're all getting money, sure they are. But this was the answer to humanity's problems, And I think it was a Prozac, they called it. We wouldn't have a problem ever again. This is what we'd all been looking for our entire lives. And again, it was promoted as totally harmless and didn't. And it took years, just like Valium did, of people working with patients to come forward and say, wait a minute, you've got housewives here killing their own children and so on, just go crazy and boom, boom, boom. Until they had to realize that and put warnings on the labels of these medications that you might inadvertently have a complete psychotic blackout with the darn things and do some crazy stuff. And again, a lot of them were sold, other ones were sold as antidepressants, and the folk were taking them, that increase in suicides with them. But the massive promotion at the time was, this is the miracle drug. We'd all been looking for this, you see. And with the Valium group, emergency departments had seen folk coming in and having physical convulsions. Often there are conscious, actually a conscious convulsion at times, where the patients are aware, say, what the heck's going on? And they begin through these rhythmic spasms, you see. And that was the drugs so dependent, the systems, your body becomes so dependent on them. The ones they're lacking, as I say, all stacks of other chemicals in your body have been switched off, and they don't just suddenly switch back on. And you would have these physical symptoms for a while. But that's rampant through the military. Rampant, And there's consequences to all of this. It's consequences to your actions as well. Because without what seems to be the obvious, visible things you're fighting for, in other words, for the propaganda that you're fed, if you don't see it in action, the real propaganda, well, they told me it was going to be this and that and the whole thing. And these folk aren't as bad as they make out to be. So without all that, you see, and you're still killing them. Yeah. Once there's a conflict in your mind, that's you. And it's drug time, and they can keep you going for tour after tour after tour doing that kind of thing if they want to. And then it's your problem later on. It is your problem. Who else is it? It's you taking the drugs to flatten your emotions. Yet they knew, those who ran the military, or used the military, and had the agendas, they're the Kissinger types and Brzezinski types. They knew a long time ago that as they ran out of good propaganda, when things weren't so self-evident, it's easy to get the folk to go off and fight if it's self-evident that someone really is got it in for you, and it's not so difficult. So difficult to go off and fight with them. But once you run out of the good propaganda, you see, and things are very different in what you're observing yourself on the spot or in the field, then it's difficult to keep all these things going without the drugs. So they knew that. And they knew that when they ran out eventually because they knew eventually as they spread the wars and the campaigns, and like the whole the Desert Storm idea, that was to expand and take out all those countries on that list that the PNAC group had put out in the 1990s. including Syria and so on. They all had to be taken out, starting with Iraq. When they ran out of good propaganda, then they got to drug the troops to keep them going. Because what you're witnessing isn't what you've been propagandized with. And so you'll suffer personally, you see. So as much as I say, it's much easier when you've really got some pretense of the just war, which was the whole thing behind the PNAC propaganda, the white hats and the dark black hats, or the Western hats, That's how simple it was meant to be in propaganda. We've also seen incredible fallout, the blowback from these wars, which is mass migration, which was all planned, by the way, like the chessboard. We'll do this. That will also cause mass migration into Europe, which further destroys the cultures, naturally, of those nations, which was deliberate and planned and written about during and after, up to the present time. And now they want to finish it off completely by finishing off a few of the other nations that are still on the list, as America's going down the tubes at home. Hard to get the troops to be so enthusiastic when you're watching your own country being demolished behind you. Again, it's all brought into consideration, and so they'll get even heavier and heavier drugs, you see, as we go through the last of these wars before you're collapsed. So sorry to prattle on so much about the effects on the military, but it's very important to realize how people are used and abused, and the same technique is used in all other sections of civilian society as well. This is a system, a very intensive system, with every segment of society completely catered to, as for control purposes, to be used and controlled at the same time, and even eventually eliminated in different forms or ways or another. Elimination, and that's how it's designed. So remember that whenever you see them starting off again to resume the same wars that were put on pause for a while, against Syria and other countries, then again they're all back on track now, and Biden's in, the front man. And that's all these people are, front people, playing their parts, I mean, Trump himself, I think, just played his part, to be honest with you. That's my opinion. And the effect of it all was to, again, demonize a segment of society which has to be eventually disenfranchised, to say the very least of it, when all this is over and their function and their warlike abilities, or to be used in wars anyway, are over and done with. They've only got a few wars to fight now. So they should think of that as their own country is under attack from their own whoever really runs them, the system are way above politics. The thing that really runs their nation is attacking them all, and they're supposed to go off and fight for a lot of nonsense in other countries for an agenda which is never disclosed to the public. Never. The truth of it is never disclosed to you. And that's the system. And it's worthwhile talking about once in a while, because wars are serious business, and people who do plan and draft up a whole list of wars many years ago, and who are still there running things quietly, with all parties, they have no problems with all the different parties, they're all fronts. Then remember too, if they're planning the wars that they do, what they've got planned for home when all of this is over. I really mean this. You better start wising up here to what really runs your nations. I would also like to mention here, before I go on to the next thing, cuttingthroughthematrix.com once again. Send a few bucks my way, and you go into the website at cuttingthroughthematrix.com to see how to do it. And PayPal, personal check, or you can send cash or use MoneyGram, whatever's handy to be used, and help me tick along, because, as I say, I'm not backed by any group behind me. And it's sad to say, I keep saying this, and folk won't wisen up to it. I understand this too. But a good chunk of what you see there that's put out to be popular is actually part of intelligence agency front groups set out there to do it. just like the colour revolutions use them across the world and have been doing it for many, many years. They do the same thing at home as well. And it's up to you, if you can discern or not discern. But there are telltale signs, quite often you'll see. And it's pretty bad now, as I say, because the net's will run its course for getting anything really said to the public at all that was of any consequence or usefulness, because now it's kind of like a menagerie, deliberately so. Almost like a National Enquirer type tabloid system, where it's kind of crazy. It's deliberately put out to be kind of crazy, and almost schizophrenic at times. It had to eventually get to that, but you find there's so many of them are put out there, just like the cyber warriors are put out there. They've got lots of the operatives out there doing all kinds of blogs, and sometimes 10-minute things, 5-minute things, sometimes a half hour, an hour or more. And that's how well orchestrated everything is today. The folk who run the world don't sit and wait for things to happen. They plan ahead of every move that they give to you, and to make sure that they always have dominance over everything. Full spectrum dominance, folks. Also means, creating an environment of counter-intelligence, by adapting to your intelligence and what you're putting out as intelligence, news and facts, and countering it by adopting intelligence and then countering it through other techniques of ridiculing it, in fact, which ends up ridiculing the facts that others are actually putting out there. It's an old technique. Works very well. Very easy to do too, really, if you're well funded. So use your common sense. As used to say, and I actually like the slang in London, that you use your noodle, and there are different terms for your head and bread and all that, little rhymes to say their things. So anyway, I'll get on to some topics now in a second, but yeah, send a few bucks my way, and hopefully I can keep ticking along, because I say I've no axe to grind here. I don't force people to go off and do crazy things, and I wouldn't dream of that. Anybody who does is using you. Anybody who just uses your emotions to get you so upset that you want to do something really nasty, you can pretty well count on it as being part of an intelligence agency behind it. That's a typical technique that they use. It's generally always emotional, or they bring into this thing about kids all the time. It's a favourite one they've been using. I don't say this doesn't happen with abuse on children and so on. There's enough children go missing all the time, we know that. And yes, there's lots of pervs in the world, but there's also a massive push to always to distract folk who are trying to change the system for other reasons, for what they see as obvious reasons, who get diverted off into this tact over and over again. I've watched it for many years, and it becomes ridiculous eventually. That's intentional as well. And folk do crazy things then as well. It's all emotive, you see. Emotion overrides your sensibilities. And that's when you start to get programmed to do stupid things, to ridicule others in the process. It's kind of like the alien thing. It was a good thing as well. Now, aliens, again, also belong into the realms of fiction, like science fiction. And I'll give you an example, an analogy here to do with. I can remember when this movement went off into child sex and paedophilia years ago, until it became like a mantra with them, until they didn't notice everything else that was happening. Look at this hand, but don't look at this hand over here. That's very, very busy. And we saw this, over and over again, this technique being used. And another technique was used again in Britain, where they diverted it off into I think it was a Down syndrome girl. And the allegation was that the police, they were using her as like a sex toy or a sex kitten or something. And it got so bizarre and ridiculous. I thought, what on earth is this? What is this? Why do they keep pushing this thing? When you're losing your sovereignty, you've got mass migration coming in, you've lost your rights and your privacy, etc., etc. But this will go off to this one person that they say is being abused, and you get if they believe that the entire police of a nation want to have sex with this girl. It was madness, nonsense. Yeah. These are psyops, these things. They have to be psyops. What else could they be, for goodness sakes? It's like that movie, it's a good movie, that Whitley Strieber put out years ago called Communion. And he was a kind of writer, and he did sci-fi, and he put Communion out, and it was promoted as the truth, you see, that happened to him. This is how it promoted it, which is a good shtick if you want to sell lots of books and get movies made. The movie did come out, and again, everybody rushed to see it. Oh my God, this guy got visited by aliens, and they had the greys in there, and the little squat bluish ones as well, that would come in and carry out your room. They'd stun you with this little kind of stick on your forehead, and stun you, and carry you off to be examined into a spaceship. I don't know why they take you to a spaceship to examine, but that's what they did. And that's what promoted something that's never ended. That was anal probes and everything, And everybody said, oh God, oh no. And then away they'd go, these aliens. Then it would happen to him again, maybe 2 or 3 times. Do you realize what he's telling you here? Huh? The aliens, they had to be so advanced, came from light years away, millions of miles, to look in his you-know-what. Huh? And they were so astonished at what they found, they came back a second and a third time. Eh? That really makes you unique, I guess. Huh? But this is the same kind of thing. There's the stuff they can put out there too, to make you think that everybody just wants to have sex with children. It's just crazy. It's crazy. That's where it belongs in fantasy land. There's no doubt about it that you'll definitely have these rings of pedos that come out once in a while. You find them in real cases, no doubt about it. But the way you're carefully, through counterintelligence, diverted off into that topic over and over and over, when you're losing your shirts, for goodness sake. And you're looking towards very shortly, the inability even to get food for yourselves. That's coming down very quickly. That's the plan for austerity too, and rationing. A complete wartime scenario, folks, has to be used to bring in a new system. And they've got you diverted off into La La Land. And folk keep falling for it over and over and over again. The one thing you will always find is doing your own study and research, just regular books out there, is how basically corrupt this system is. That's all you have to really know. Totally corrupt. Completely corrupt. And in a system we've already been taught, that life is cheap now. That's part of the training you're getting now. Through the COVID exercise, through the bioethics committees. Life is cheaper. We've got to decide who to give the treatments to, because we can't just give it to everybody, to make them pull through this, etc. We ration care. See, you're getting taught that life is cheap, and you got folk who are higher priorities than you, Their social credit systems and all the rest of it. I've got articles about even that tonight. But this is what you're living through. You're being trained into a new system that was discussed in the 1920s and 30s, and Brave New World had it in it, The end of life, that they've decided, why pull you through? But they might have to ration that medication for folk who are younger or more a chance of living longer than you will anyway. Well, you might live in there 10, 15 years. I'd say it's pretty decent, Well, so why not give it to you as well? No, we can't do that, you see. We're deciding you've lived long enough. And we don't really need you. I mean, do you have any real social standing, any purpose right now? Are you on any higher committees to serve humanity? And, this is how they put this rubbish across. And that's what you're living through. You're getting taught. And you're accepting it. You're all accepting. Well, suddenly old folk are like a separate species, You're all going to get there, folks, and you'll think the same thing way that you thought when you're 20 or 30. Your brain's still functioning. You're still you. You're not decrepit. It's really sad, isn't it? That they can create so many divisions in society that you go along with it without even realizing you're being trained. And to see things the way that they want you to see it. Until you'll say to yourself one day, oh, that maybe, I've hit that age, maybe it's time for me to go. I'm taking up the other person's resources there. You're all getting trained. And folk don't know it, eh?